So there's a sheriff in Arizona, and the sheriff's department folks convince him that he's only got a badge on and no clothing, but they convince him that he's fully dressed. Oh. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. Tonight we have a very special guest, Gene Hislop, who is going to talk about, as you might have guessed, immigration and the situation in Arizona and how it relates to American justice or lack thereof. Gene, I'll let you introduce yourself first to the audience.
Sure. Hello, audience. I am Gene Hislop, and I am basically an immigrants' rights activist for our local community, and of course I also collaborate with nationwide organizations. So,
would you like to talk about local issues first, or would you like to talk about Arizona first, or one in context to the other?
Well, let's handle the nationwide context, because I think that can actually put local events into context about what is happening nationwide, and that Danbury obviously is not an isolated area for the immigrants' rights struggle. Obviously, if you know what's happening nationwide, a lot of the towns and indeed states are kind of tightening the noose on the immigrant community. So when Danbury back a few years ago proposed the 287G ICE access program, which of course authorized local police to collaborate with ICE.
Now, ICE is Immigrations and Customs Enforcement?
Correct.
Okay.
This is actually a nationwide trend. Thousands and thousands of immigrants have actually already been deported under programs like 287G and ICE access. It's supposed to target specifically criminal elements, but unfortunately a lot of times it actually just winds up imprisoning people who have been collaterally arrested, which means arrested while somebody else was a criminal. They're just in the same house. And one of the biggest concerns is that it does lead to racial profiling. Putting this in a nationwide context, lately our biggest struggle has been in the state of Arizona. Arizona recently passed a bill called SB 1070, and SB 1070 is a tremendously unjust law.
That's Senate bill, I presume?
Senate bill, mm-hmm. And this is now passed. It's already, being implemented. It's being challenged, actually, luckily, by the ACLU and other allies. And what this program allows is for police to question people for their papers and their immigration status based on a reasonable suspicion that they might be here illegally. Of course, the definition of what justifies that, what gives them a reasonable suspicion, has never been clearly defined for the public.
So there's no clear definition of what the protocol is to stop someone and question them about their citizenship status.
Exactly, which means that anybody who is an immigrant, even one who came over when they're 3 years old, they need to be carrying their papers with them on at all times.
Do I need to carry my papers?
That is, of course, the question.
Well, I would like to know the answer.
Honestly, most of us are afraid that who this is going to be targeting is obviously those who have darker skin color. Mm-hmm. What people don't understand is that it's not just going to target the illegal immigrants, but it's also going to cause huge problems for legal immigrants. School kids, and even Native Americans. As a matter of fact, AIM West, which of course is the American Indian movement,
mm-hmm. Yes.
Of the western region, they're actually vigorously opposed to this law. Of course, they are the first Americans. If anybody has a claim to that territory, it would be them. But they are tremendously disturbed by this bill and about its implications. Obviously, if you put a person from Mexico right next to a Navajo Indian from Utah who just managed to move to Arizona, they're going to look very similar, in skin color, especially, in those conditions. So it's going to be something that we're going to see a lot of cases of racial profiling, a lot of unjust stops and arrests and questioning. And it also has other, side effects, basically.
Yes. And what are those?
Well, first of all, I should mention as well that copycat laws like this have been considered in many other states: Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Utah, Idaho, Oklahoma.
Minnesota, what are they going to arrest Canadians?
I have no idea, but these have already been discussed and put on the roll for other states to try to implement this bill. So it's hugely, very concerning. It also makes it a crime to provide any transportation to someone if you know that they are undocumented.
And the way to prove that they knew that they were undocumented is?
Who knows? That I cannot answer.
So
how would you
really
ever?
No, it sounds like there's no clarification in advance of any of these laws to give the police. And the police want to have guidance. They want to know under what circumstances they want to have their jobs clearly defined.
That's correct.
Because otherwise now they're flying blind, and it makes their job that much harder. I know that we talked about the last time you were on about how in Danbury, just to segue back to the local scene, in Danbury, how it used to be, whether you call them undocumented or illegals, it's neither here nor there, but the immigrant community would in fact tell the police and cooperate with the police if one amongst them were guilty of a serious crime. They would cooperate with the police detectives. Now when this Immigration and Customs Enforcement Act comes in, all of a sudden now they're afraid to talk to the police.
That is correct.
And cooperate.
That is correct.
So the job of the police detectives becomes much harder than it used to be.
For that reason, even in Arizona, there is a police chief or a police lieutenant who is currently suing the state of Arizona because he does not want to have to perform this part of his job. He believes that it is something that makes communities much more unsafe, and this is actually something that has been fought over by a lot of police chiefs. They have actually, said, no, we don't want to do this. This is bad policing. It is bad. It's fostering a bad climate in our cities, bad relations with the public. We do not want to do this. And many of the chiefs in Arizona, in fact, in Phoenix, agree. Which begs the question: if the police know this, then why are our politicians acting in a contrary manner?
Who better to understand the nature of police work than police officers? So in fact, it sounds like a lot of them are taking the same type of role as a conscientious objector would have taken during a war that they felt was unjust.
That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. As far as it making it illegal to transport an undocumented immigrant if you know that they're undocumented, I mean, if you think about, what if you wander across a girl who looks lost because maybe she's dehydrated, or maybe she's, pregnant and she's about to give birth, and you have to try to give her a ride to the hospital. You're giving her a ride somewhere, or just a small child or an 11-year-old child who happens to not have their papers on them, and you have to give them a ride because they're lost and wandering your area. Now all of a sudden you can't do that, or you could be held legally responsible. So this is how disturbing this policy is.
Now, there's a whole segment of our society, and it's a lot of them are libertarians, and we've had a lot of libertarians on this show over the last year talking about government interference in our daily lives. And now I know that libertarians would be highly offended at having to carry papers of any kind and prove who they are on a daily basis.
Right.
Now, doesn't it seems to me, maybe it will or it won't seem that way to you, but it seems to me that to libertarians, they would be very concerned about legalized American citizens being subjected to this scrutiny by an all-powerful federal government or all-powerful state government.
One would think and one would hope. Unfortunately, we're not always seeing that being the case, especially in, obviously, the southwestern states. So that is obviously a disturbing trend as well. Obviously, this law is just a very dangerous thing, and you would think that anybody who is an American citizen would really be opposed to such intrusion by our government and such obviously dangerous policy as this. But that is not the case nationwide.
I'm hoping that we've had discussions lately about we have the Tea Party movement, the "Don't Tread on Me" folks that don't want that government interference in our daily lives, and again, most of them have libertarian tendencies, if you will. But and we have now the Coffee Party movement, which is not the alternative to the Tea Party movement, but it's a movement where people from across the political spectrum can come and get together and find common ground, like our show is known for quite well. Find common ground and then find points of disagreement and respectfully discuss them. Where is this going to fit into that? I mean, where's the common ground amongst Americans in general on this issue, and what are the points of disagreement? Let's look at both sides. You be the devil's advocate for a moment and look at the other side and juxtapose the two positions and everything in between and talk about that for a bit.
Well, frankly, I think that the other side is very well represented in our media. I really prefer to not give a lot of time to the other side because right now you have the Glenn Becks of the world and the Hannitys of the world shouting this message. And unfortunately, you have groups such as FAIR, which is... that's
a tax group, I believe.
It's a huge anti-immigrant organization.
Oh, okay.
They, of course, say anti-illegal immigrant organization. However, it has been listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center as one of the largest hate groups currently. And it obviously has hate group leanings.
In what respect?
Well, first of all, FAIR is the organization that actually funds the Center for Immigrant Studies, which is actually the group, the think tank, I should say, that has supposedly conducted these very in-depth studies that have proven that illegal immigrants lead to crime in our communities, which has been proven patently false. As a matter of fact, that was in Newsweek last week, a huge article on it. They've also purported studies that immigrants take our jobs. Again, last week, article in Newsweek says that actually in the future, because our trend is immigrants are not coming, that immigrants are leaving voluntarily or being deported, and the birth rate in places like Mexico, as well as amongst Mexican immigrants here, is actually dropping. So we're actually, in the future, going to have a dearth, a big vacuum of labor. As a matter of fact, in New Mexico currently, their biggest crop is chili peppers, and these chili peppers are dying on the vine because they have nobody to pick them. So if they're taking our jobs, then why aren't Americans flooding into those positions to take those low-paying jobs of crop picking? That doesn't make sense. So they have put out these false studies with false facts time and time again that has stirred up hatred towards immigrant communities. What's more disturbing about FAIR and the Center for Immigration Studies is they are actually funded and founded by John Tanton. John Tanton was originally a militant environmentalist and obviously former head of the Sierra Club, who got very heavily involved with the eugenics movement.
Eugenics, you'll have to refresh my mind about that.
The eugenics movement obviously was very big in the 1900s. I mean, if you think about the former the founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, originally was created almost as a white supremacy dream. It was basically to weed out through birth control or through forced sterilization people of gypsy background, people of Native American background, people who had defects, etc. That eugenics movement is still running, especially in the days of genetic engineering. It is still a very popular movement. John Tanton supports zero population growth.
Okay.
And so therefore, he actually has even vocally supported forced sterilization of Mexicans within their own borders. So if that's not hatred, I don't know what is.
Well, I can see the call and the idea about keeping population stable, but not at the expense of
human rights.
Individual groups that, well, for lack of a better term, we'll call them non-white groups.
Well, I think forced sterilization of anybody is a violation of human rights, obviously.
Yeah. And the Chinese would speak to that very well, I'm sure, because we've had John Kusumi on the show a couple of times talking about what the Chinese do to keep their population in check. And all well and good to keep a population stable and prevent the population explosion that we're going through. But it has to be done with respect to human rights.
In history, it has been taken one step further every time that it has been purported. In China, obviously, we have a preference for male children.
Yeah.
So obviously, that has been affecting the population of women there. In our history, we obviously weeded out these various groups. Actually, whole tribes almost disappeared here in the Northeast. Native American tribes have been basically crushed by the eugenics movement. And obviously the worst case scenario is Hitler actually studied our eugenics movement to form the basis for these horrible experiments and exterminations that he did in Germany.
And as you mentioned, the Gypsies, because the Gypsies, as I understand, were the first group that the Nazis went after.
Correct.
And even in Europe today, and now Diane and I went to Czech Republic and Slovakia back in 2004, and the family took us on a little drive around the countryside and pointed out to us, oh, those are the Gypsies. They come into the town, they get welfare, they get free housing.
And you hear the connection? That's right.
They get food, they take, they give nothing back.
And you hear the same rhetoric being applied to the immigrant community.
Well, you know me, I had to say something about that to my in-laws, and then they were respectful of my point of view because they did like the fact that Diane and I were not George Bush fans. That much they appreciated. That opened the door to us to talk about some other things. But it sounded just like Americans in, let's say, the 1950s, 1960s, well, probably throughout most of America's history, talking about the blacks.
And now it's the immigrants. And it has been through different various points in time. It was the Irish, it was the Russians, it was the Jews, it was the Chinese.
I know very well about the Irish.
Over and over again.
Sure.
Over and over again through history, unfortunately. And like I said, this is the foundation of this organization, FAIR, which almost every anti-immigrant group bases their model and their information upon. John Tanton also is, backed by, hate group leaders of the Ku Klux Klan and has been photographed with them. Actually, the author of the Arizona...
Careful, that's guilt by association. We don't want to do that.
But, I mean, he photographs with him, they fund him, they send contributions to his organization. Yeah. It's a very close association. It's not a distant one. In fact, the author of this bill was supposedly Russell Pierce. Russell Pierce was a former cop whose son was actually shot by a criminal who just happened to be an illegal immigrant. So Russell Pierce has been very vocal throughout his current administration and when he was a police officer that he feels uncomfortable around Latinos. Russell Pierce,
I don't know
however...
why. The music's good, the food's good.
Russell Pierce...
The women are pretty.
Yeah, they certainly are. They are beautiful women and men.
I suppose. I'll take your word for that.
They are.
I don't know that for a fact, but I'll take your word for it.
But Russell Pierce actually is also photographed frequently with current heads of the American neo-Nazi movement and the Ku Klux Klan. They also send huge campaign contributions to him. And actually... the man is not known for his eloquence and his, writing ability. So guess who has?
That sounds like.
So guess who has actually?
That sounds like.
Right. So guess who has actually taken credit for authoring the bill?
Who?
FAIR.
Oh, jeez.
The lawyer for FAIR.
Yeah.
So now we have this anti-immigrant law that's been proposed by anti-immigrant hate group that supports eugenics. And this is the boat that we're in. And all of these laws that we've seen nationwide and even locally with our 287G are based in basic myths about immigrants. They have been... Let's say the 287G was certainly cheered on by the local anti-immigrant group who lobbied very hard. And one of the ways that they lobbied very hard was using studies and information passed on by FAIR and by CIS, of course, the study branch of FAIR. So this is how it ties in locally. So we can honestly see if this trend continues, if other states manage to pass laws that are similar to this, we could possibly, especially if obviously Boughton running for lieutenant governor,
Mark Boughton.
gets into
we'll call him Mark Boughton for
Mayor Mark Boughton. I apologize.
Mayor Mark, okay.
Mayor Mark Boughton. If he got elected to the state level of administration, we could very easily be seeing similar laws here in Connecticut.
Laws which he had quite a bit to do with being instituted here in Danbury. Very broad question. Do we as a species, do we as a culture, do we as a people have some perverse need to always find a fall guy, to find somebody to pick on, somebody that's weaker than us, somebody that's not as well-to-do as us, somebody that doesn't, that's somebody that's an easy mark?
I'm not a sociology professor or an anthropology professor, so I'm not really qualified to absolutely state that I know where that comes from. However, I can certainly see why people would think that. I think that what it is people who are afraid of change. I think that people are afraid of change. They are afraid of newcomers. They are afraid that they might not hear American music, that they might have to learn to speak a couple of words in Spanish to communicate to somebody in an emergency. They are scared of working next to somebody who doesn't speak a lot of English. They are scared of change. Even religious ends have been brought out in this. I mean, not as much currently, but certainly in past waves of immigration, it was, we don't want those Catholics here. Because, America was mostly a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, nation.
Yeah, is there any group, I guess, other than WASPs, if you will, is there any group of Americans that haven't at one time been the butt of jokes, the downtrodden in some way, shape, or form? I mean,
I can't think of. I mean, I'm pretty sure.
The Irish. I mean, I'm third generation Irish myself, and I know my grandparents got treated very badly.
I'm pretty sure that every single culture has been oppressed in some way or another throughout history. Maybe the English have suffered less of it, but I'm sure,
perhaps,
depending under which king, you know what I mean? But
there you go, yeah.
But at some point, everybody has been oppressed or singled out, and there's a name to refer to everybody. If you go to certain pubs, you'll hear them. Unfortunately, everybody's been targeted.
Mix.
Let's not go there. Let's not.
Okay, but
the fact
I can say that because I'm Irish.
I'm Irish too, but. But anyway, everybody has been targeted at one point or another, and throughout history, a lot of it has been politically related. Fearing that under Kennedy that people would vote Democratic, and so we wanted to cut the Catholics because they would vote for Democratic candidates. It's always been interwound politically.
And somehow the Pope would be in charge of America a week later once Kennedy became president. That was one of the things that was. I remember that because I was very young at the time, 8, 9, 7. Okay, there I got it. 7 years old. A little math deficient for a second, but there was a lot of talk about how if John Kennedy became president, that suddenly the Pope would have his hand in everything that happens in the United States.
Exactly, and that's the kind of fear and hysteria that has always driven us to ostracize cultures. That's so unrealistic. That is, and honestly, history has obviously shown that was an unrealistic fear. Much as our fear that has been stirred up by these anti-immigrant organizations that say invading hordes are taking our jobs. They're not invading hordes. Okay, they're human beings.
Yes.
And immigration has actually declined over the last 20 years, from 1990 to 2010. From 2000 to say 2003, 2005, it was growing and it was booming. After that, it has slowly started to decline over time as other economies came up to ours, as our economy dropped, as the birth rate has dropped. So these are absolutely patently false myths that have been proposed by anti-immigrants.
So then it's basically all comes down to economics.
Economics.
Status in the world, and we had a great argument about just not to deviate for a moment, but there was the big argument during the Bush administration about protecting babies, if you will. and trying to cut back on abortion. And now abortion had been down during the Clinton administration because the economy was good, people had food on their tables, they felt comfortable about having children. President Bush comes in, the economy starts to sour, and during a quote-unquote, pro-life president, and that's his word, not mine, but abortion is up because of economics. Doesn't this all come back to economics?
It all comes back to economics, but other factors too. Even in times where economics are booming, like in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when economics are doing very good, you're always going to have a vocal minority who are upset at the changes coming to our world and at things which they see are scary.
Well, nobody likes change. I mean, people are... change can be frightening to people, especially people that are older, that have seen. In the case of my parents, my mom saw the advent basically of the telephone. So you can imagine how somebody that the telephone became a widespread technology item during her lifetime. Imagine when the internet came along. I mean, although the internet is basically, I guess you could think of it as being just an extension of a telephone anyway, but change upon change upon change upon change, and those changes actually accelerating as time goes on. It can be very frightening to people.
It can be very frightening to people. I think that the fact that we're becoming such a global society can be frightening to people. I think the fact that America might not be quite the economic or social superpower that it used to be is very frightening to people. I think that, obviously after 9/11, anti-immigrant furor was at its all-time high immediately following because of, tons of Muslims were disappearing off our streets because immigration was just pulling people off the streets without any charges and holding them and deporting them. And so this was something historically we saw. Fear of any change, fear of tragedy, fear of loss of economics. It's all fear-based.
The ebb and flow of history, if you will, because prior to 9/11, we had seen a lot of improvement. As an example, in New Jersey, where the state police were profiling, and there was a big push to end that profiling, which of course is wrong because you shouldn't judge people according to the color of their skin, according
their religion,
to what kind of car they drive, what turnpike they happen to be driving on.
What clothes they're wearing, which is exactly why SB 1070 is so dangerous, because they're saying you can be stopped and detained by police on reasonable suspicion, but they're not defining what reasonable suspicion was. Just as right after 9/11, they weren't defining what reasonable suspicion was to detain and hold Muslims for months. So we are facing the same situation, but with a different cultural group right now in Arizona.
We're going to wrap up the first show. We'll come back for a second show, but is there a definable enemy here in this struggle that we're involved in? We're going to come back and do a second show. We're going to talk about that and some other aspects of immigration. This is Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. We've got Gene Hislop as a guest today. And we'll be back in a couple minutes for the miracles